welcome in, and thanks for joining us on what we hope turns into some type of recurring series from us here at WIL Canada. We look to take a deeper dive into the world of work integrated learning, or WIL, for those of us in the space that like to use acronyms. My name is Dan Lonergan. I'm the Associate Director of Partnerships with WIL Canada. I've been in the WIL space for about 5 years. I really like meeting new people, learning new things, talking to people. So it kind of made sense. Well, what if we start some type of show or a podcast and we talk about things? We talk about work integrated learning and everything that comes with it. WIL in and of itself, it's not a new concept. It's been around, with Kolb bringing it kind of out through experiential theory in the 80s, and he drew on every scholar in the 20th century. But lately it's evolved. It's become more prominent, more discussed. Terminology has changed, and it's grown into something bigger. And there's a lot of language out there that can be confusing at times. So before we kind of, go on with this program and dive into all the different types of WIL that might be happening across the country, we thought maybe we should actually take a step back and talk about, well, what is work integrated learning, or what is WIL, who's involved, and what it means for everyone. So I'm very excited to be joined today by two outstanding guests, both from the WIL space. First up, she's the past president of the World Association of Cooperative and Work Integrated Education and former vice provost of students at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, who now spends her time consulting, researching, and publishing in the WIL field. Dr. Nancy Johnston joins us. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
And he's a faculty relations manager in co-op and experiential education at the University of Waterloo. He's also served as the inaugural president of the Experiential and Work Integrated Learning Ontario, and is the current chair of WIL's Accreditation Council. Scott Davis joins us today. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks very much, Dan. Nice to see you both.
So thanks both for joining us, and generously offering your time to talk through this today and just talk in general. So let's have a conversation about WIL. Let's get right into it. And Scott, I'm going to start with you. So you're the WIL rep, you're the WIL guy on the call. And so for those that are listening that maybe, have no context for who WIL is, what they do, can you give us the Coles Notes version on WIL?
Yeah, you bet. Actually inaugurated back in 1973 as CAFGE, the Canadian Association for Cooperative Education. And we've now morphed into 2017, where we became Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Canada, using the acronym CWIL. We are a volunteer-run national association that's made up literally hundreds of thousands of hours of experience from WIL practitioners in post-secondary institutions across Canada, as well as we have employer members that are part of our group as well. Our mission, if you want to say the mission specifically, is to build capacity for developing future-ready students and graduates through quality work integrated learning. These members work with students across the country, and the pool of talent that they bring, combined with those employer members, allows us to partner quite readily with post-secondary institutions, community members, employers, government agencies, and the students themselves to champion work integrated learning, or WIL, as you mentioned earlier. We affectionately refer to it as WIL across Canada. We've partnered with a diverse variety of stakeholders to provide resources that promote the highest quality in post-secondary work integrated learning. And that's achieved through establishing things like national standards that are grounded in research-based rationale, promoting the value of post-secondary work integrated learning, and delivering opportunities for learning through the sharing of best practices. I've mentioned WIL several times, and so I think I probably better define it so it's just clear exactly what WIL is. And it is a form of curricular experiential education that formally integrates a student's academic studies with quality experiences within a workplace or practice setting. WIL experiences include an engaged partnership of at least an academic institution, a host operation, and a student. WIL can occur or the course or program level and includes the development of student learning objectives or outcomes related to employability, personal agency, knowledge and skill mobility, and lifelong learning. You may recall that I mentioned earlier there's 9 forms of WIL, and I'm purposely not listing them now because it matters less what form of WIL is chosen and more that a meaningful experience is provided for the student in whatever WIL format works best for the stakeholders involved.
So, like I mentioned off the top, it's evolved, right? You mentioned kind of where CWIL came from, where it is today. You mentioned things like 9 different types of WIL, quality, stakeholders. There's a lot at play there. So if we dig into that like a little bit more, what is quality work integrated learning, quality WIL, and how do these stakeholders connect? Like, how are they interconnected in this space?
Well, quality WIL involves meeting established standards, and where CWIL Canada is well known in the space from a cooperative education point of view, with a long established accreditation council. And our Quality Improvement Council members are currently working at developing quality frameworks for the other forms of WIL, so that there are guidelines and benchmarks and measurables that institutions can use when they're developing their programming. There are definitions for people to follow. There are program development guides that help institutions develop the quality programming that they'd like to implement. And those are all available, as I mentioned, in terms of sharing best practices, those are all available for our members.
So Nancy, then I look at you as, the academic and the research side. If, we talk about quality WIL and course-based curriculum, can I ask the question then what isn't work integrated learning in your eyes or in your opinion then?
Yeah, happy to answer that or give it a go. I mean, this all can sound so complicated because what is and what isn't WIL depends on who you are as the stakeholder, really. And I mean, Scott has nicely outlined sort of what the professional body has said sort of falls under the bailiwick, but essentially it's a learning model for a learner, a student in this case, it's part of a post-secondary academic experience that allows them to develop new skills and knowledge and apply skills and knowledge that they learned in their classroom in a workplace environment. That's what WIL is. It isn't take your kid to work day. It's not about observation. It's about deep immersion, genuine, authentic engagement. It isn't cheap labor. It isn't a way for the marketplace to get their hands on talented, smart, motivated university students and college students who but not pay them. It's a legitimate partnership between an institution, a student, as Scott said, and a host, an employer host, whereby learning is the main important outcome for the learner and for the institution, and where talent identification and early access to really bright, motivated young people in particular sectors is probably the primary motivation for an employer. So what WIL is and isn't is probably debatable depending the lens that you're looking through, but I think we can all agree it's an academic learning model that benefits each of the stakeholders in different ways.
And I get the sense then from a stakeholder point of view, if they come forward with a purpose or a need, then that's kind of what can drive WIL. And the relationship and the partnerships probably that form from, once you start that the first time, and then as it evolves and as it grows with a post-secondary institution, over the years. Scott, from your experience working, you're a faculty relation manager working a lot with industry. Where do you see this purpose, from industry side coming and approaching an institution and starting to form a relationship that way? What is the purpose of WIL then in that regard?
I think Nancy hit the nail right on the head in her previous comments. And from my perspective, it's talent identification and acquisition. And it really doesn't matter the form of WIL that you're using, but it's the ability for students and employers to connect with one another, to get that deep learning and to experience the opportunity to be in a practice setting whether it's in a public company, a private company, whether it's a small startup, whether it's a giant corporation, whether the student is working on a specific individual task or a research type of engagement, or whether they're out in the field doing actual applied activities. And from that perspective, it's really the opportunity for community partners to identify talented individuals whom they may wish to recruit in a full-time capacity when that student finishes their studies.
And I think that's the key point there, Scott, if I can underscore it. Yeah, it is talent ID. Sometimes it's about getting your hands on talented, motivated students to fill a gap in your workforce, or to work on a particular project for shorter periods of time, because these students are in and out of these workplaces every 4, 8 months or 12 months.
That's right.
But mostly it's a recruitment, motivation, and the ability to test drive, really, we've often said, potential future employees. The lucky thing is, even though from a student's vantage point, we like to think that education is the focus and that it's a learning model and we're really focusing on learning outcomes, most students engage in WIL in order to facilitate their transitions to the workforce. So their alignment is about employability. So they're much more closely aligned in general than with employers than they might even be with their own institution. And so that's kind of good. Most of the students that undertake a WIL will say, yeah, I'm doing it so that I can get a job more easily, so I can get a higher paying job, so that I know what jobs I like. And so those purposes are quite aligned, I think, between the student and the employer host, because they're around employability. But where the institution kind of takes a different take on it is this notion of making it an educational model. And so there's accountability here about learning outcomes, make sure that the students are still seen as learners. Yes, they're full-time employees, but they're seen as learners, and so there's supports in place. It provides a really neat opportunity for those employer hosts to talk to higher ed institutions and talk to them and give them feedback about their curriculum and their offerings and things they see that are working and things they would like to see perhaps done differently. And that's always been a complaint, that higher ed operates over here and its ivory tower, and in business and industry and community operates over here, and never the twain shall meet. So this model, these models of work integrated learning do provide many bridges for conversation, for talent ID, for stopgap measures, and for clarifying people's needs. Students at the end of the day end up determining whether this is what I even want to be studying, and whether, if I'm studying this, in what kind of sector, workplace, size of business would I like to be working once I complete my credential.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Nancy. The whole idea of test driving, not only for employers who are test driving potential future employees, but students who are test driving potential careers, workplace opportunities, and employers themselves. It's a bit of an assessment from both directions, and it really is a very dynamic, very powerful combination.
So I want to circle back, Nancy, to a point you made about, connecting with institutions and the challenges that have presented historically with external stakeholders. And from my work in WIL and kind of, navigating more than one WIL type, I've come to learn that partners can take on many different roles. Historically, you think it's supervisor and that's the role they take, and they take on a student and that's it. But, you see things more along the lines now of mentorship, or more of a strategic partner, depending on the WIL type. And you see how the students engage with that, and depending on which WIL type that they're engaging with in their course. I guess, Scott, in your work, again, with industry and with partners in building these relationships in different capacities, how critical is that to WIL and as a component, as opposed to it being kind of, more transactional of, I take my student, thank you very much, and that's kind of the end of it?
Well, I think the relationship management and relationship building is the really critical piece. We think of our community partners, employers, organizations, however you'd like to think of them. We think of them as co-educators. Nancy mentioned a little bit earlier about the mentorship. This is not slave labor. This is not just come in and do the job and don't engage at all. This is about coaching and mentoring, developing talent because if you're really developing and identifying or filling your talent pipeline, you need to be filling that with people that you feel are going to be engaged and be able to contribute and add value to your organization. And so the coaching, the mentoring, the supervising all fits together in terms of the relationship that institutions build with their employer partners. So we're constantly engaging with them. We ask our employer partners to provide us with job descriptions that we have an opportunity to vet to ensure that they're going to be providing the kind of work experiences that we think are worthwhile for our students. We ask our employers to submit evaluations of the students at the end of the work term so that they're actually engaged in that process itself, that reflection and evaluation of the student's performance over the course of their work term. That helps the student learn where they're showing areas of strength and where they're developing competencies. It also helps to identify where they can work on improving and starting to find new competencies that they can develop. And it gives the employer then feedback from the student as well on things that were going well in the workplace. And employers have learned some valuable lessons from our students on ways that they can adjust their own practices, their own management techniques, their own business and product lines because of the feedback and the interaction they've had from our students.
And that's a really good point, Scott. I just want to follow up with, and that's what the students bring. And it isn't always the most cutting edge of knowledge or skills, perhaps, although sometimes it is. But it's an energy and an enthusiasm and a learning orientation quite often. And I've heard over the years, many employers say, we love having the co-op students in this case come into our workplace. It brings a breath of energy. It actually invigorates our current employees, and particularly in the SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises, where you don't get that breadth of scope of variety and diversity in age sometimes, or even in backgrounds. And so a lot of employers find that in addition, obviously, to the productivity they get from the students, there's an energy and a freshness that is brought in through this young, more keen new lens. And a lot of employers report that it kind of lifts everybody up in the workplace to a new level.
And I think you see that across, all forms of WIL, regardless of the type and the specific title or the way that it, appears on paper, that you never really know until you go down this path as a partner what you might get when you work with students or when you take on students. I guess going back to the institution, and Scott, you did a really, articulate job of explaining your role and the way that you coexist with external and internal stakeholders. Nancy, as a former senior admin at Simon Fraser, how do you view the role of the institution when it comes to WIL?
Well, let me start, Dan, with saying that I actually think WIL brings more to the institution than the institution brings to WIL. And I mean that in the sense that, yeah, it is that bridge, but there's a lot that is being done for the institution in terms of helping it meet its stated goals and objectives. Most of our institutions, right down to the program level, are accredited, and most of them now have learning outcomes related to demonstration of skills and applied knowledge in the area that is being accredited. So they want evidence that students can actually do, not just know about, but know how to. And that's a little bit of a shift from the old school university. It's certainly always been that space in college and technical institutes and polytechs, but it's really brought some of the more traditional universities into the place of applied research, applied knowledge. And that's really neat. And you see these WIL programs proliferating and serving a really important function on helping other academic plans at the university meet their goals, helping accreditation goals that are stated that the university is trying to seek be reached. And they cite, well, that happens through our service learning program. Oh, yes, we absolutely work on social responsibility through our business programs. And we also work on employability through our cooperative education programs. And here's what they do. And here are the stats. So they provide data. They provide evidence through the sort of feedback mechanisms that Scott was talking about earlier, basic things like employer feedback forms, employer assessments. Most institutions have some form of employer advisory panel, that gets to speak to the institution on a regular basis. And so I do think that the WIL programs provide that real life, I hate to say it because there's real life happens in academia, but real life link back to the place where the majority of their students are going to graduate and hopefully contribute to when they leave. The institution, of course, just provides that learning focus and the framework that focuses also on quality and accountability. And it also obviously provides in Canada fantastic quality program delivery at the academic level. We can all feel very confident. We're lucky in Canada. Our post-secondary institutes are almost all quality and a high quality of education. So we can be confident, those of us in the WIL space, that when we put a student out with Biology 101 or Engineering 224, that they are going out with a very solid set of knowledge and rudimentary understandings at the level commensurate with whatever course it is. So obviously the institutions provide a lot, but it is a two-way street.
Yeah, two-way street is exactly right, Nancy, because the students also bring skills and experiences and feedback back into the classroom. And that's that really great two-way street. So it is a learning model, as you mentioned earlier. And our institutions and our faculty members, our instructors, our teachers learn from the students as well. And the students learn from one another. There's a lot of peer support that goes on. There's a lot of peer coaching. And all of those things make for a more robust, healthy, really dynamic learning environment.
Have you not heard Scott and Dan, Prof, say to you, I can spot the co-op students in my class. They always ask the best questions, or they bring a story to a concept that they're teaching that brings that concept to life. And exactly. So they do bring a lot.
Yeah, and I've seen it in talking to to industry partners that I've worked with in terms of students who have multiple types of WIL in their back pocket. So maybe they're a co-op student, but they've also been exposed to service learning or applied research, and the commentary in terms of things like interview skills and confidence and ability to articulate their skills and their capabilities is just, it's different. Like they said it, like they came across not knowing the background of this student or of these students until you get into that conversation. But we've seen it firsthand that getting exposed to these multiple types does have direct tangible benefits to things like interview skills and obtaining entry level positions right from graduation. So I want to come back to these types, and we've talked about it a couple of times, and then Scott, you mentioned it off the top about 9 types. So there, and from my work and what I've seen at schools, there's a lot of language out there, and I think schools will define WIL as it suits their needs, and I think they're good for doing that, because you should take a look internally to your campus and figure out, well, how does this make sense for us? And I know CWIL has kind of the guiding 9. So I guess from your experience going through that, Scott, why 9? Like, why the multiple types? What did it allow schools to bring as far as input, but also allow CWIL to do?
I think it was the best way in which to encompass the practices that were already ongoing and to put them into categories, if you will, that are recognizable, that are able to be defined, and that are able to be measured, so that, as I mentioned earlier, our Quality Improvement Council can begin to develop the necessary quality frameworks. So you think of things like practicums and apprenticeships and entrepreneurship and cooperative education, which we've talked about quite a bit. Those are the buckets that CWIL Canada has decided to use as categories for these many different forms of experiential education that have been happening for, in some cases, hundreds of years. You go back to apprenticing. I mean, you can think of how long that apprenticing has been going on. And so by identifying and naming these particular groupings of activities, it really helps us to define, for the purposes of education, for the purposes of accreditation, as Nancy mentioned a few minutes ago, really helps us better categorize and define and then develop quality frameworks for these groupings of work integrated learning activities that we've identified.
And I don't think there's any magic number. Why 9? Because 8 wasn't enough and 10 was too many. You know,
exactly.
It's fairly arbitrary, and this was a Canadian association doing it for what we found in the Canadian space, and we're trying not to complexify something that is kind of basic. An institution, a student, an employer, let's all learn and have some mutual benefits from it. They all share that core. All 9, all 21, all 52, doesn't matter. All will share a core, and that's what the Quality Council of CWIL will be looking at, is for these to be quality, what do they have at their core that are attributes of quality work integrated learning, and then what specialty bits do they have that define them slightly differently? You know, how is service learning slightly different than cooperative education? Because couldn't both people be working for a not-for-profit, and both people be developing a global, you know, community assets and so on? The answer is yes, but there's some fundamental differences on their primary purposes, so that we'll be focusing on those. But you can get quite tangled in this name game, certainly at the provincial level, at the national level, and quite frankly, internationally.
Yeah, and I think that's where language, you know, can become a barrier, and it can add complexity to it, especially if you're a first-time partner, you know, in like you mentioned, small, medium-sized businesses and enterprises who maybe you've never partnered with an institution before, or maybe you've historically just taken a co-op student and that's what you're comfortable with, but you're just not aware of other opportunities. So I think I want to end on this piece, and I know we've talked about it previously in like independently and collectively as a group, but if I'm a potential partner sitting at whatever my desk resembles these days, what's the first step? Like, is it trying to identify a need? Is it picking up the phone? You know, Nancy, what do you suggest if I'm a partner out there that just isn't sure what I can do?
Yeah, I think you hit on it in both cases, identifying a need and picking up the phone. If anyone ever picks up a phone to actually make a phone call anymore, but
exactly.
No, they probably don't. I think the real difference is, like I said, all of those model types, they share a common thread. So how would I know which one to go to? And it's because at the edges of them, they're different in certain ways around their primary purpose. So I would suggest to an employer, why do you want this person? Is it a long-term talent ID strategy that's your primary purpose? You want to get your hands on it. Is it that you need 20 animators real quick because you've got a project that needs to be done, and so you have a short-term labor need? Is that your primary purpose? Is it because you know that you have some monies that you want to dedicate towards this, and you can afford salaried people on full-time secondments for 4, 8, or 12 months? Oh, then I'm going to go to co-op. Or is it because you just want to get to know your local institution better, be an active participant and a co-educator, and so are willing to take on students in a variety of capacities? And so once you know what is driving your needs, and you have an understanding of what you would like done, what would make you happy at the end of this 4, 8, or 12-month experience, then I would try and contact one of the CWIL institutions that's a member of CWIL Canada, who understand quality work integrated learning, and talk to them about your needs. And they may call something service learning at their place, which at the place down the road might be called a practica. And they may look very similar to the employer. And I don't wish for employers to get confused or complicated or even worry about the naming. Let's just make sure their needs are met, and that you get put onto the form of WIL that best meets your needs and best meets the students' needs from a quality perspective. What do you think, Scott?
Well, I think that's exactly right, Nancy. You know, we think of pain points. So it's all about conversation. If you have a pain point as an employer, you can't get work done. Nancy, you mentioned short-term needs. You need 24 animators right off the bat. If you've got a pain point and you want to get a hold of quality individuals, reach out to a local institution, an institution that you maybe know because you're an alum. Maybe you have colleagues in the business who have recruited from a school, and you trust their judgment. But it is about conversation. At some point, you're going to have to pick up a phone or be on a Teams call or engaging in person when we can actually get back to that particular form of relationship building, and then have that deep conversation about what it is that you're looking for, and what can this school help provide through the basic forms that they have available at their school. And you're right, Nancy, it doesn't matter what we call it. Figure out what's the best fit for you as an employer.
Yeah.
And then we want to align you with the best fit of student. We don't want you to be looking for student X at school Y if school Y doesn't teach the program that student X would need to have, that skill set. So we would try and work collaboratively within the industry as well. And that's a really, I should say this, and I hadn't thought of it before, but this is a real strength of CWIL Canada, is that we collaborate very well with one another as institutions, even though some might think of it as being a competitive environment, because we all have students that we're trying to find employment for or a service learning engagement for. But we also collaborate really well because we're in the business of helping people learn and maximizing the opportunities for them to learn and grow and develop talents that they're sort of future ready for their own full-time jump into the workforce.
And Dan, there's a tool, right, that I think CWIL will be working on and available to employers that at least shows where the CWIL institutions are located geographically, maybe what programs they offer, because sometimes I need an engineer, but sometimes you might find your engineer, doing a second degree in communications, so it's never quite that linear. But I believe you guys are working on something that's should be a little help, a wayfinder, if you will.
Yeah, there's lots more information on the CWIL Canada website, cwilcanada.ca. There's resources currently there. There's some in development for every stakeholder group. So whether you're, an institution, a practitioner, and or even a community partner, for all types of WIL, we have a directory of members and opportunities that's underway. So that, when somebody is sitting out there and they're ready to pick up the phone and ask those questions, if they're not well established with institution down the road or the one closest to them, or they're just curious to know what else is out there, it's a good starting place. And then, then you connect directly with the institutions, as you both, articulated. That's where you can get into the details of, well, here's what I need. What do you have? And then you make those relationships with those schools and with those departments, and you take it from there. And I think if you've traditionally engaged with one type of WIL, you don't be afraid to branch out and try some others and see how else you can connect with student talent. And I think the points that both of you made in terms of this relationship and engagement between student, institution, and partner is incredibly valuable. And I just want to thank you both for taking the time to lend your expertise, and thank you for the work that you both do in this field. It's greatly appreciated. And so, I just want to thank both of you again, Dr. Nancy Johnston and Scott Davis. I'm not exactly sure what type of recurring schedule this show or whatever this becomes will turn into, but I'm confident it's not going to be the last time that we talk about work integrated learning. So until whatever the next time that looks like, take care of yourselves, and thank you both again for joining me today.
My pleasure, Dan. Great to see you both.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, CWIL, for this little opportunity to share a bit more.
Absolutely.
Thanks.